Hello everyone, welcome back to the Forge, where you can get your daily dose of Realogy. It's time to throw your illusions into the fire and reclaim your awareness. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about influences, and as I mentioned before, covering my personal scope of reality. I think it's important when talking about the kind of topics that we'll cover in this channel to know where I got some of these influences from, where are these thoughts coming from, because that also gives you the right to scrutinize and to see whether or not you agree with the sources, or at least just so that you know where I'm coming from, and kind of forming my own version of reality, my understanding of things based on the things I've been influenced by. Dating back a month or so ago, it takes me a while to kind of put all the information together for these sometimes, but if you look at the Earth population in April of 2021, we have about 7.9 billion souls on this planet. The opinion of one person, being me, only occupies 0.901265.8%. That's 1.3 times 10 to the minus 10th for those who are mathematically inclined. Basically a very, very small number as far as the overall opinions of the entire world's population. A number that small, if our worldviews differ a little bit, a challenge comprising that very, very tiny number of the total population's opinions, it's not a threat. We're going to talk about some of these topics. Some of these things you might not agree with. Some you might be hearing for the first time. It's all fine. We're not here to talk about right or wrong. It's just about sharing ideas. We'll discuss where some of these things have come from, addressing some of the things we've been told, and trying to see, do we still agree with some of those things, or what are some of the alternative explanations that we can maybe glom onto that can help us come to a more complete understanding. We have to understand in talking about these kind of topics that sharing thoughts does not need violent defense, and a lot of times in humanity's past we have taken just that approach, that protecting certain ideals, thought processes, things like that is become so important to some people that if it becomes a challenge, if that idea gets challenged rather, they might see the need to resort to, again, violent defense of that idea, that topic, hurting or even killing people who dissent or disagree with them. I think it's important, and this is what this channel is going to be about, is that we have to seek a harmonious worldview. Or if we don't, I think we'll never grasp the complete story. Now, some people are okay with that. Some people often, tell me even, you can't know everything. It's no point in trying to chase down the details of all these specific things across the entire world. Well, to some it's not important, to some it is, but I still think it's helpful for us to understand and have a better understanding of our own history and our nature and where we come from. The truth is much more complex, I believe anyway, than what any one group promotes. And again, it's also problematic that almost every group you come across seems to think that they have all the answers or the total story. Maybe some of their adherents don't, but those in their leadership positions also think that they're going to be the one and only source for accurate information for history of the entire planet. It's simply not the case, and we'll try to highlight that as we go forward with this channel. As a people, planet-wide, we draw a lot of our moral guidance from writings that are thousands of years old. Now, yes, some people have a lot of modern writings and works that they reference or that they might utilize and kind of lean on, but for the large part of people, there's quite a few where their ideals, their moral guidance is drawn back to some of those documents they've inherited, or that their family or that their region have held in high regard, and that ends up shaping the ideals and the mindsets of those who are raised in those environments. That in of itself is not so much of a problem, except that we forbid challenges to any of that material. We let it become so sacred, so holy, that it's blasphemous to even pose a slight challenge or question some of these things. That's the part that can be problematic, right? We end up locking ourselves into ancient mentalities. Whether those mentalities are good or bad, we're not afforded the chance to really review them and scrutinize them for that, from that standpoint, because it's forbidden. You can't challenge it. This is what it is. Accept the entire picture as we give it to you, and that's just it, right? So you're kind of locked into this position of, I have to accept this totality of this work, even if I don't maybe necessarily agree with certain parts of it. and maybe my own moral compass would say certain parts are good or certain parts are bad, you're not given that chance to scrutinize and really decide for yourself. That's the part that I feel can become problematic. We restrain our knowledge to whatever those people whose writings we're following did or did not know. Now, I'm not trying to say that as an insult to those people who come before us and who wrote a lot of these very important works, but they didn't know everything. And a lot of times they'll even tell you that much, right? And then not knowing everything, we have to accept that there were things that were maybe unknown, things that maybe they were wrong on and didn't understand. The important point is we have to allow ourselves room to grow, right? Those people that did their works thousands of years ago, their time is done. Their stories are told. They've documented and written down what they did, what they were exposed to, what they learned, what they taught. And that book is closed, right? But we who are still here, we who persist, are still having opportunities to learn, to grow, and to know more. And knowledge is being gained and increased on a daily basis. Shame on us to not take advantage of that because somebody from 4,000 years ago said that, the earth is flat and at the edge of the earth there is this, way to just drop off and into nothingness. We know better than that now, right? And as that topic is, can illustrate just across the board, we have to allow ourselves to be able to grow beyond what generations before us maybe did or did not know. Sometimes it's considered blasphemous or arrogant. That's one of those kind of ridicule arguments given towards anybody that has an opposing viewpoint and an attempt to try to keep everybody kind of in the same line, thinking the same thing, and to keep this, kind of forced compliance to whatever the mainstream narrative is, right? So a lot of these reasons are why I'm still and always will be a student. Having an open mind, collecting data, doing research, doesn't mean accepting or adopting every single ideology that you've studied. It just means that you have an open mind. You're open to considering that maybe my main author, my favorite author or favorite book didn't go into all the depths and details of every single aspect of human origins, of history, of whatever the case may be, and then I can look at other sources and potentially find helpful information. Sometimes it's opposing, sometimes it adds on to, right? But we can have ourselves an open mind and be able to collect data and make fair and good judgments sometimes on what we choose to accept or not out of some of those sources. In doing so, I'm not going to say that there aren't dangers. There are certain things we have to be careful for. You have to be aware of your vulnerabilities. Where have you potentially been deceived before? What topic do you maybe not know enough to defend yourself from somebody who would come into that topic and give you a lie, right? You have to be aware of that you're coming in. I have an old friend of mine's favorite saying was, none of us are born into a vacuum. You have certain things that you already have an opinion on, how our history has come about, how certain things have taken place. You have to be aware of where you have some of these, foregone conclusions or biases, and be aware that when you're going through and looking at other sources, it's going to be easy, very easy, to latch on to a topic or to a teaching or a book or a writing that further, encourages those ideas that we already had, right? So you have to be aware of what am I seeking for, and not jumping onto the first source that you find that just agrees with you. It's not going to always be that simple. You got to be aware of where you can take advantage, or of where a certain writing may afford you an advantage over somebody else by the way that it's written, and be cautious to not just accept it because of that reason. And again, your preconceptions, your own biases, your prejudgments, whatever the case may be, you are coming in with a mind of your own and in various stages of awareness, granted. But we just have to be aware of, how some of those things will affect the way we receive information that comes to us. Again, from the standpoint of giving this information to you all and talking on these topics, I think transparency is required. I want to share my frame of reference, what I think and what I believe, right or wrong, right? Just to, again, give you all at least a fair shot of understanding where some of these things that I'm talking about are going to be coming from. And again, this is all my interpretation. I don't represent any group or institution. This is from my studies and things that I've collected and looked at over the years, and just sharing some of these thoughts. I may not be 100% aligned with every source that I cite, but they all are considered when I'm contemplating my own mindset. So again, as far as my influences go and my transparency and all this, I spent about 13 years in Christian ministry, and no one at that church or in those groups that I fellowship with is to blame for my mindset but me. It certainly was not endorsed by any church body, especially when it comes to looking at expanded sources. So you can't go back and look at, oh, he came from this group, this is why he led him to this mentality, therefore this group in Christianity is bad or is troublesome because of this reason. This is completely separated from that group, and you can't blame them for where I am, basically, is what I'm saying. And I also have put a lot of thought and stock into what I found in the Law of One, and I feel like I've gotten a lot of understanding coming from that source material, and find it very valuable, at least in my walk and my path. To me, it gives a lot of insight to our purpose. I was also drawn to it and interested in the fact that it gave constant praise of the Creator, something I was not really expecting to find outside of the Bible, for how cautious biblical and church leaders are about only trusting and relying on our single source. I wasn't expecting, to find that kind of praise constantly of God or of the Creator in another book. So that kind of took me off guard a little bit as well. And I also found it striking that they have such a strong emphasis on love and service to all. Especially love of all and service to other people, right? So again, one of those things where if every other book is so bad, you kind of go out there not expecting to find some of these treasures and some of these, gems of knowledge in another source. So it was a little bit kind of took me by surprise a little bit to find that kind of material in these other sources. And also their talk of positive polarity. And again, it talks about negative polarity as well. I feel like I resonated more with the positive polarity aspect of it, because it does kind of give that self-accountability of being benevolent and a good person that does, again, show service and love to others. Engineering background for me, science-based degree, right? So those two things alone are going to often seem to kind of contradict each other. You have often people that either get into a religious, spiritual field or a science-based field, and it's typical that those two things don't interact and contradict each other, if anything. I feel like in my case, those two parts of my background have helped me to maybe have a slightly unique interpretation of the information that comes to me. I can kind of look at it from both the disciplines and try to help myself understand a little bit better any information that I'm consuming, and I try to pass that knowledge on as often as I can, right? With the engineering discipline, it helps you to have a very methodical and a methodical way of thinking, and it really helps you rely a lot on progression of evidence and causality. This issue caused this problem, and being able to have strong evidence and a clear path connecting those two. It doesn't let you get to a conclusion that is not based on evidence or a slow progression of certain causal methods that again has a clear tie from one to another. So, I feel like that's helped me in my religious and spiritual work and studies to be able to make sure I'm drawing good connections between certain things and not just kind of making these huge leaps and bounds without any apparent connection between the two. And I've also looked a lot at works surrounding the Sumerian cuneiform tablets. These were tablets that were discovered in the 1500s. It predates the Bible. Okay, it was discovered in the 1500s, but obviously predates the Bible means it was written before. Okay. And it's the creation epic from Abraham's native land. And in the Bible, you'll read that Abraham was from the land of Ur, which was short for Sumer. Okay, and this is corroborated by mirrored biblical events and scriptural mentions of Enoch and Anakim in the Pentateuch, Joshua, and Samuel. There are some events that are shared, is what this means, between Abraham's story in the Bible and the story of his family and people that came after him and before him, right? In this Sumerian creation epic. Okay, 19th century influencers for this topic and of the progression of knowledge from the Sumerian cuneiform tablets are Henry Rollins and Nicholas Schmidt. And in the 20th century, Zechariah Sitchin kind of is the one that's probably more at the forefront of our minds, and some others since him. But he was the first one that I was at least exposed to, and I think he was the earlier person talking about some of these topics in the 20th century. And again, a lot of people have come after him, maybe in some cases offered up different interpretations of what those texts meant. But again, he was my first exposure to the interpretation of the Sumerian writings. And I also want to just kind of quickly cite in the listing of these names that for myself, and again in my own influences here, I get a lot of information as well from another YouTuber named Paul Wallace in the Fifth Kind channel. And he does a lot of these studies and kind of reveals a lot of history on how some of these things have come to us. So another source of data for me, and this was more, I know that in the way that I look at sources and the kind of discussions I've had with people, that sometimes anything that does not come by the way of mainstream media or mainstream sources, something that's not widely accepted and discussed publicly, a lot of people are not comfortable embracing those things as a part of their truth. So even when I start finding something that I think, hey, there's a connection here, hey, this is something meaningful, this sounds valid, this sounds more plausible than whatever version of mainstream truth we've been told to believe, a lot of times I don't really talk too much about it to people that don't have that same kind of mindset or don't look at similar sources until there is a touch point, until there's a connection that I can draw back to mainstream media or somebody that's speaking in the public eye and in publicly accepted sources to kind of talk about some of these topics. So in December 2017 was an important milestone because the retired director of ATIP, that's the aerial, I forget what the other A is, but Aerial Threat Identification Program. And the retired director of that program, Luis Elizondo, released Pentagon footage of a tracked aerial object of unknown origin. To me, this is the tip of the iceberg. For a lot of people, this is, oh wow, the Pentagon is saying that, yeah, there's this footage of this craft out there that they say they don't know where it came from. They don't know who made the craft. They don't have this kind of technology, if you want to believe all that. And again, they're thinking that this is the first time we've had this disclosure. This is the beginning of something great. Tip of the iceberg. And really what they released was, maybe has its own agenda to it, in that it provides so little information and no confirmation one way or another of which way, the government is kind of leaning with these things and what they truly know, right? But again, it at least provides that touch point back to those who rely on mainstream media for those narratives to say that, hey, look, there's something there. They're acknowledging that they have footage of this object and that they don't know where it came from, so they say. Okay, and they think that it's beyond the capabilities of any other Earth-based countries and technologies. So again, this is at least one point of validity in this and some of the topics that we'll be talking about going forward, right? I rely heavily on, and again, one of my earlier exposures to this topic as far as life elsewhere was through the Disclosure Project and Global Government Witnesses from Stephen Greer. You can look at the press conference that he did in early 2001, as well as just, the many videos and websites and things like that he has of multiple sources of information that are coming from the government. Okay? It's important, and that we can look at, sources that tell us, I think this was Donald Rumsfeld back in September 10th, the day before the 9/11 terrorist attacks in New York City. He announced that there was $2.3 trillion missing, unaccounted for funds in Pentagon spending. There was a Forbes article in, I believe, maybe that date was in 2017. But the Forbes article said that, from that 2.3 trillion that was missing back in 2001, the number had now grown to 21 trillion by 2017. And that was not accounting for total losses. I believe that number spanned from maybe like 1998 through 2015 or something like that, right? So it wasn't even the whole picture. But it does show that what was acknowledged publicly as 2.3 trillion had grown to 21 trillion during those years. That's a very terrifying trajectory. And also, again, to me, it tells me more than I think most people may be willing to admit, in terms of how much money the government is sourcing into projects like this. And I think there's a lot of evidence from those government witnesses, that there's a lot of reverse engineering going on, and that some of these unknown origin craft are actually some that are actually built and derived here, that we do have technology that's beyond what the government is willing to admit. I also like to review and rely on the Matilda O'Donnell interview, and I think that her writings complement the book by Colonel Corso, who was another witness for Stephen Greer, and he wrote the book The Day After Roswell. I was kind of surprised at how many parallels there were in her interview text and that of Colonel Corso's book. So to me, that kind of gives it credence and some validity, and that they were at least talking about some of the same people and around in the same time frame. And I think that it also gives good insight into what actually happened the day after Roswell, what followed those events. I like to look at a lot of other ancient writings, leaked government documents, the abundance of photo and video evidence. There's more than enough information out there. And again, I look at all this when I'm trying to formulate my own worldview or galaxy view or universal view or whatever, however big you want to go. But I consider all these things as valid and trying to figure out what's real and what's not. Sometimes the front page news stories are of interest to people, and some of them that you can go and look at and kind of get a better understanding of, again, what's happened, what has been documented, maybe reported on for one day and you never hear about it again. But you can go look back at the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, and I believe the paper date was from February 25th, 1942. And you can also look at the front page news of the lights over D.C. in July 1952. As of August 2017, and I'm sure there is more recent surveys than this. I'm not sure why I pulled a date from that far back. But anyway, as of August 2017, 47% of the U.S. population believes in extraterrestrials. I will come back around to that number later because, in my opinion, that number is much larger, and I'll explain why. Not even accounting for just the difference in time. This is 2021 now and doing this video. But I think that there's a larger number than what's represented in that 47%, and it's for a different reason. And also in 1995, there was a Ted Koppel news report, and he reported on a CIA psychic spy program, and this was on the evening news, and this was developed into a public and civilian remote viewing programs and projects and businesses like the Farsight Press. But again, when we start talking about remote viewing or somebody by location, somebody sitting in their bedroom and able to almost, if you want to call it, astral projection, or in some way move their consciousness to a different location and witness events that are happening regardless of barriers of time and space. The hint at this program was mentioned by a 1995 Ted Koppel story on this project. Not to mention that with the Freedom of Information Act, you can also go to the CIA website and find a lot of information. You have to sometimes know the specific project name that you're looking for. Okay, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to find. But there's a lot of documents posted on the CIA website that also talk about the remote viewing projects, their findings, their funding, and the validity of what they found in a lot of these cases. That again, if you are aware of who was involved in this project, how much money they spent, and the capabilities of the people involved, makes the stories and what they found very believable. And again, this is another one of those touch points that kind of gives you data and insight into we are not out here alone. So I'll give throughout the course of this channel details about what is and is not accepted from each source and which one lends credibility. Again, I don't believe everything from everything that I read, but I kind of do pick and choose sometimes based on whatever I can accept at that point. Everything that I'm going to talk about, though, is open for discussion. And more than likely, just because, again, I consider myself an eternal student, I'm always going to be learning, never going to say I've learned enough, or I know enough now, where I'm done. It's more than likely that I will pivot on maybe one or more of these topics over time, just as I continue to go on and study and try to learn and absorb more. Our minds, as a side note, our minds should not be so closed and so set that we have all knowledge. Again, there's always going to be more we can learn if we put ourselves to the test. Always be ready to let go of whatever you have also for a better version or a more comprehensive version of the truth. This is, again, what allows us that flexibility to say, yes, I think this, but now this other thing has come along that gives a more clear version of truth, something that I understand better, something that resonates with me more than what I held on to before. You have to be able to have that confidence to say, you know what, this makes more sense. I'm going to let go of what I had and embrace this newer vision or newer lesson that I've come across now. And the framework for my scope of reality, again, it's in almost every aspect. It's probably going to be contrary to the mainstream. But you should know that anytime you start to oppose the mainstream, ridicule comes along for the ride. For me, I've kind of grown into the kind of person, and it's not right or wrong, but just throughout my time, I've grown into the kind of person where that doesn't mean anything. Especially as I've started to take more control over my own belief set, my own conclusions, and again, my framework, or the framework of the scope for my reality. because I'm not just taking some pre-packaged idea that somebody else said you have to take in its entirety, and I'm carefully scrutinizing and weighing these things for myself, the more I do that, the more confident I've become in why I've landed on the conclusions that I have, and therefore it kind of increases my confidence or my resiliency to the ridicule. And it's fine if you're not that kind of person, or if those things do matter to you or affect the way that you lean, that's fine. I just don't want you to start thinking that the kind of things you hear on this channel are going to be everyday conversation for everybody right at this time, because some people are just not ready for that conversation. And if that ridicule bothers you from stepping outside of the mainstream version of events, I want you to know that ahead of time, so you don't put yourself into that kind of situation where you think this is open knowledge and you want to go and share it with someone and they look at you like you're crazy and start to say, hey, this person is off their rocker or is following this other, fringe kind of thought process. Know that ahead of time. Not everybody is ready for this discussion. If you have, that's great. And, I'm going to continue to put out content that we can, further this discussion, but don't want you to be entering into that kind of situation blindly. To reiterate, this is your own journey. Only providing this information for you to consider and figure out how, if at all, it fits into your paradigm or your understanding of things. Don't go anywhere you're not comfortable. If you want to reject everything you've heard and everything you will ever hear or have ever heard on this channel, that's your prerogative to do. If it's not comfortable territory for you to venture into, don't go. My opinion is only 0.0000000012658% of all of the opinions on this planet. It's a very, very little number. Therefore, there's no pressure. If this doesn't resonate with you, it's fine. Take care, everyone. Until next time, remember, seek truth, reclaim your knowledge, your existence, and your reality.